My mind is set, my grind is set, my heart on ice is cold. I'm only here to even a score. Whoa. My mind is set, my grind is set, my heart on ice is cold. We down right now, but did it before. Whoa. See from here we going up. Made the call, I shown up. Now the game is sewn up. Say my name is blown up. We up, 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 we up. See from here we going up. Made the call, I shown up. Now the game is sewn up. Say my name is blown up. We up, 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 we up.
What up, Night Nation? It's your boy Roger, and it's another episode of The Knighted Ones. In fact, it's episode number 115. So, as a reminder, we are the only podcast that features a former UCF national champion, a former UCF radio host, an ESPN analyst and hoops player, an infamous, yes, that's infamous rapper, our resident influencer, and IG star shooting the breeze talking UCF sports. Remember to like and follow us on YouTube, IG, and check out the 70 plus teams and conferences on the College Huddle and, of course, the Big 12 Huddle. This week, it's the off season, but it's not because there's a lot of things that are going on. Obviously, we've got some new defections from UCF's football team. Part of that is by choice and part of it is not. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk a little bit about a transfer portal update. We'll also talk about DB coach Brandon Harris and what his future is. We'll talk about the PFF grades for the season. We haven't looked at those for the season. Who was hot, who was not. And then we'll also talk about a bunch of dollar signs. And what I mean by that is there $30 million in the offing for UCF? And should we take it? Big question to talk about there. So without further ado, let me go ahead and bring on the one part of the crew that's here tonight with me. The one, the only, Alan Levin. Welcome back to the stage, Alan.
How's it going? It's been a little while.
It's been a hot minute. One could say a scalding hot minute. I don't know. A very hot minute. But without further ado, you know, we always start the show when you're here with a hair flip. So let's get her done. There it is. There it is. Remember, folks, once we get to 1,000 followers, Alan Levin will allow me to cut his locks on the screen live, and you'll be able to participate in that. So we can tease him. We can do whatever we want to do. All right. That being said, welcome to the show, Alan. Glad you're back. There's a lot of things to talk about as far as the portal is concerned. Right now, it's not popping as far as people that are coming in other than who's available. So there's some thoughts about who could be coming in. But right now, it's about who's going out. So this is not the fun part of the portal. It's the part that we really don't like because we get to see who says goodbye and who says they're going to stay. So why don't we start with that? Tell us a little bit about who is in the portal, who's declared for the portal, and the state of the team. We went over it last week. Let's talk about it for this week.
Yeah, so since last week's episode, there's been 5 new entrants into the portal. So if you haven't been keeping up, that's a total of 13. So let's go over the new ones. Obviously, the big news that, you know, kind of hit everyone like a train. You know, anytime you hear a big name, regardless of production or anything, you know, you really feel it. And, you know, we're getting numb to portal transfers. That's, you know, we're going on whatever it is, year 4 or 5, with this being the norm in college football. But the big one was obviously John Walker, someone that homegrown kid, you know, chose us over numerous college offers, the highest rated recruit in program history, you know, had multiple chances to leave, you know, UCF. He's been here for 3 years, but ultimately he did decide to transfer. So, you know, it's a loss for sure. I mean, someone like that, it's a feel good story, especially at the time when, you know, he chose us over UF primarily. So it was a big recruiting win. You know, I think it deserves a little bit more attention to talk about this before we get into the other, you know, ones that transferred. But for me, you know, I think a lot of transfers are, you know, hired guns, right? They're 1-year rentals for the most part. You get these guys that are either seniors and going to graduate, or they come here for 1 year and then leave again. But anytime a guy that transfers that you recruited out of high school that's been here for multiple years, I think that stings more than anyone, even if it's a guy that didn't even play. And that's not the case for John Walker, but I'm just saying in general, I think those hurt more than when a transfer that transferred to us then transfers again and never really felt like, they were a true Knight as the same as a high school guy that's been here for, almost an entire, class rotation. If you think about it, almost the full 4 years. So it hurts, but something I put on my page, and this is, this is just the honest truth, how I feel. I never felt that John Walker's hype matched his production. And I know there's the whole, he got double teamed and this and that. And, but at the end of the day, stats wise, he really did not stand out. I think you could make the case he might've been the third or fourth best defensive lineman on UCF's team this year. This year he had 1 sack, 40 combined tackles, and 3 tackles for a loss and a forced fumble. Obviously not bad. Someone that's a contributor, someone that produces. But I mean, this is a guy that coming into UCF was talked about as a potential All-American candidate, potentially one of the best D linemen in UCF history. And I just don't think the production ever matched that hype. He was a good, solid player at UCF, but regardless of that, this one hurts. Would you agree?
Well, I think the big thing with Walker, obviously this past season, he was injured for the vast majority of it, right? But he was one of the 2 inside linemen and defensive tackles that ate up a lot of the run game, right? So running against UCF in the A gap and B gap was pretty much non-existent all year long. So yeah, it does hurt. There's a few things. We had a new coach that came in from John Walker's camp. The thought is that he didn't think that he would be able to stand out as much as he needed to in this defense. He played in it for 1 year. Different fronts, different defensive schemes. We rotated our defensive linemen quite a bit, especially our tackles, which was great to keep them fresh, right? Because we had the quality to be able to do that. But at the same time, it took a little bit away of the luster and the shine from John Walker and his ability to separate himself as he gets ready for the NFL. The other thing that kind of goes with it, as far as the hometown hero thing, yeah, I would have loved for him to have worked out. He's a local kid. He chose us over UF. That was a big win. We were all excited about that when it happened because everybody was expecting, leading up to his announcement, there were a lot of people that were expecting him to sign with UF. In fact, one of the UF media were at his house when he did his announcement, and there was a little bit of a kerfuffle or whatever when the UF guy was pissed off that basically John didn't sign with them. So this was a guy that was one of us, right? And he transferred out. But from what I understand, he was a priority for us. We just weren't willing to pay, to your point, for the production that was there. And then on top of that, we did pay him what he wanted. He was the highest paid player on the team for 2 years. And then this third year, he was injured and didn't have the output that we expected. And then on top of that, he was expecting to be paid, in the wake of, what happened last year. And we're competing with the Texas Techs of the world that are willing to spend a 1.2 million. And then on top of that, he wasn't really popping in our defense. So go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think all those are good points, and he might have been injured, but he played in all 12 games this year, so he didn't miss any time. I mean, he might have had some lingering effects from last year's injury that caused him to miss the whole year. It's definitely possible, but he played in every game. So it's not like, he didn't have an opportunity to shine in some respects. But, I think he finishes, I mean, let's call, spade a spade in some respects. He was here for 3 seasons, but played a total of 2 because he missed all of last year. So he finishes his UCF career with 64 tackles, 8 tackles for a loss, and 1.5 sacks. I mean, nothing really that special. He did, like you said, Roger, he did not pop like we'd hoped. And I know injuries played a factor. Some of the defensive schemes may have played a factor, but I mean, when you talk about the highest recruited player in UCF history, not really that memorable of a UCF career. And I know there's factors there, but you would have thought, 2 years, let's just call it a 2-year player because he didn't play one. You would have thought more than 1.5 sacks over 25 games and, made a little bit more of a dent. But, I hate to lose him, especially because we lose a lot of key defensive linemen to graduation, Angela Kelly and Malachi Lawrence and, players like that. So, he would have been a welcome return for sure.
Yeah, the big thing is I think it was a parting of convenience for both parties, right?
Yeah.
Because UCF
Yeah.
wasn't going to be able to pay him the type of money he could have commanded elsewhere because there's still a lot of other schools that recruited him and coaches that recruited him that would be willing to pay that. And we just unfortunately are not. So, there's the thought that you can redistribute that wealth. Is it on a QB? Is it on, other players that we needed, wide receivers, whatever it is that we needed. But at the same time, I think that made sense. The other part about this is John Walker is getting ready for an NFL career. UCF football has a lot of question marks going into next year. So he's going to need to have a platform where he can get noticed, which means, unfortunately, right now where the program is, it's not at UCF. With Gus Malzahn at the time that he signed, there was a lot of promise. There was a lot of momentum. There was a lot of things going for us. We were winning in the recruiting sphere, and then it just kind of fell apart. So I think it was more a mutual parting of ways than anything else.
Yeah, I agree with that. It wasn't like there was ill will. And I think, at the same time too, he's not a Frost guy, right? He was a Malzahn guy. So I think, like you said, first of all, I don't think the money that he wanted is something we were willing to pay, just due to that production and being able, he wanted to be paid like a top defensive lineman, a top guy on the team. And, we can really spread that wealth amongst other players for, guys that could produce just as much as him, at least for the history that we've seen so far. That's not to say that if he transfers to whatever school he transfers to, he may have a big season. It's not to knock his talent, but what you have to review and look at what the facts are so far. And I don't know that he's worth, what some of like, call it like
Lee Hunter money.
Lee Hunter, exactly. We're not paying John Walker $2 million, let alone any player that much. But just in general, whatever the comparative amount is, we're not going to pay John Walker $1 million when we could potentially get 3 to 4 players for that amount. So to me, like you said, it's a mutual parting of ways. I don't think it's something where he's going to talk smack about UCF. He seems like a good kid. He'll probably look fondly on his time here, and we'll remember him for sure. But it's not, going to be in the same breath as like a Bruce Miller or Terrence Plummer or, Shaquem Griffin or some of these great.
Or RJ Harvey.
Or RJ Harvey or Traquan Smith or someone like that. So, that's John Walker. The other, that kind of sort of had an exodus at defensive lineman because 3 more defensive linemen followed him in the portal. We had Malachi Boone, who was in, I think the last, not this most recent class, but the class before that, never really played, was a 3-star guy, but did not see the field too much. Then we had another defensive lineman transfer announced today, Andrew Rumpf, another guy who did start to see the field a little bit more, in the recent seasons, but wasn't necessarily a big time contributor for UCF. He was going into his junior year. And then Derek LeBlanc, this is someone that there was high hopes when he did transfer over to UCF from Oklahoma, and a guy that we expected to do big things. But to be honest, he never really made that much of an impact either. This year, he pretty much was invisible until that 4-game stretch towards the end of the season where he did start to play and contribute, and we started to see some of the promise and some of the hype around him. But then ultimately he got injured again, and that's been the story of his UCF career. He's essentially been injured the entire 3 years that he's been here. So from what has been said out there, he wanted to get paid like a top level starter on defense. And again, UCF wasn't going to commit that for someone that quite frankly has not produced. And then the final transfer so far of this, since we last spoke on the podcast, was offensive lineman Carter Miller, a guy that also had, was well recruited in the transfer portal, became a starter right away. He was someone that was all conference at Louisiana Monroe last year or the season before. Was one of Pro Football Focus's highest rated pass blockers. And this year he was pretty good for UCF. Started out as a center, and I think he got transferred over to left guard, or maybe it was right guard. I would consider this a loss, but with UCF's offensive line, we know the struggles this year, and we know the whole position group is in flux. I mean, they didn't even have a coach, unfortunately, for their essentially, had a temporary coach for the, most part of the year. And, UCF we'll talk about it, but is in the process of hiring a new coach. So a lot of these, a lot of offensive linemen are going to commit to an O-line coach. And when that whole thing is in flux, I think it makes sense. So there's going to be a massive turnover at the O-line position regardless. So, it's a loss, but, I think it is what it is with offensive line.
Yeah, the biggest thing for me, as I'm kind of looking through who this was, is Derek LeBlanc for me, I think is the bigger loss because he finally started, playing to what we expected him to play towards the end of the season. And,
towards the end,
that's one of our strengths, or one of our strengths coming into the season was going to be our D line. And so there's a couple of folks there. Then our ends, we have some issues there as well with Kelly being out. I wouldn't say issues, less depth when it comes to that, right? So it'll be a new look there. As far as Carter Miller is concerned, anybody from this offensive line, I expected them to turn over one way or the other, O-line coach or not. I think everybody knows that the O-line this year was just simply not good enough. And, to use a George O'Leary-ism, it's NGE. So I'm not that worried about it. We were going to have to go portal shopping quite a bit for O-line anyway. We knew that position group was going to be decimated. I was a little bit more worried about the D-line, though. So the good news is our linebackers aren't going anywhere. Those folks, we told you over the past couple of weeks, those folks that UCF wanted to keep, they made a priority and kept. And, word is that a lot of folks basically were told, you aren't good enough to start here, and we're told you're not coming back. So, as much as we were talking about culture, et cetera, Scottfrost was very upfront. So this is not going to be the last group that we talk about that will be leaving this team. And that may not necessarily be a bad thing, because Scottfrost did tell folks to take a hike. And, those that were good enough to stick around what might be depth pieces or might develop later, if they come out of high school, we pay them the NIL, they don't develop, or we have a season like we did this past season, then those guys are put on the scout team. Like, hey, you still have a scholarship, but we're not paying you any NIL money. And that kind of is a way for people to leave as well. So what I expect is, as much as it's going to suck over the next week or so, because there will be more announcements of people leaving, I think it's going to be an exciting 2 weeks when everybody starts signing, because we're going to have a ton of people to announce. It's going to be even more. It's more like what it used to be during National Signing Day for high school kids than what it was before. But, not any big losses. Yeah, it sucks that we lost John Walker. I would have liked to have seen him stay here, but I also understand why he wanted to leave, not just from a financial standpoint, but also he's got 2 years to show that he's good enough to be in the NFL, and we're still in a rebuilding mode. And there's not the guys that make it to the NFL. A lot of them are on teams that are doing well or making enough noise that they stay in the news cycle. And unfortunately for him, because if they stay in the news cycle, that means scouts are watching them. They're at the games. They're watching the news cycle. And, it's Do I think it's going to be like it was last year for the upcoming season? No, but is it still a roll of the dice for John Walker? Yeah. So I think I don't begrudge him for leaving. And I also don't begrudge UCF for not paying him to stay either, because that was the other big part of that too, because he was the highest paid player on UCF's roster last year.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's UCF, with the financial resources it has, and I know there's going to be an influx and they're going to be a full member of the Big 12 and all that, but UCF still has to be smart with this money. We do not have, at the end of the day, Texas Tech money. We don't have some massive donor that's coming in and says, here's basically unlimited money, go buy a championship team, which is what Texas Tech did. So when you have a budget that's somewhat limited, at least relative to blue bloods or oil money type of schools, if you will, you have to be smart about the players that you want to retain, and you have to be smart about having enough money to spread around for other transfers, especially when you talk about there's some very, very big positions of need that, most notably quarterback and offensive line. If you can't go and just pay John Walker, whatever it is, if you don't have a quarterback and offensive line, because what is that going to do for UCF? It's not going to make a difference if John Walker comes back and there's nothing going on offense like we saw this year. So there's a lot bigger needs for UCF to fill. And quite frankly, I think they have to make tough decisions. And it's sad to say, but I think they made the right decision here by not retaining him. And they got to be smart with their money. And I think there's something to be said, like, on some level, you do need to retain core players, because you can't just have hired mercenaries every year and have 70, 80 new players every single year like we did this year. That's not sustainable for success. So you do need to bring back a core group of players, guys that are, whatever it is, sophomore, juniors, that are going to be here for at least a couple years, but it has to be smart. And I don't think paying John Walker an exorbitant amount of money would have been the most wise way to use the NIL budget that we do have.
Yeah, the other thing, as we start thinking about this, we're talking about the money that we do have versus the money that we don't, right? And being smart with your money. There are other teams that are making different decisions with that money, right? So you even think about, what's going on with the directionally challenged school, West Central Florida over there. Those guys, they're borrowing basically a loan from the academic side that will never be paid back, more than likely, to win now. Now, they're in a different situation than what we are, right? We've already made it to the P4, despite this season not showing like we belonged as a P4 team, especially with a quarterback that was the fourth worst quarterback statistically in the entire power conference structure. Fourth worst. So, which, believe it or not, is actually worse than how the quarterback position performed the previous year. Now, again, this year we were cycling quarterbacks, et cetera, but it's still, the quarterback positional play was the fourth worst. And we still almost had a chance to win 7 or 8 games. So what that tells me is a couple things. One, when we load up, because we will load up, I think we have a better chance of having a better season next year than we did coming into this one. It also tells me we really do need to hit on a quarterback as we move forward. And then you're going to see a lot of, UCF has always been conservative, both by nature and by necessity, as far as how we spend our money fiscally. We'll see which is the better route, right? So the Cows are kind of in desperation mode. They have to spend that money. They have, unfortunately, a much bigger endowment that we do. So they can, if they have to, offset that with the academic funds. They're basically where we were before. We would overspend on football, right? In previous years relative to our peers. We had the #1 budget in the AAC most years, if not every year. And now we're just in a totally different league. So we need to adjust to that. But, at the end of the day, I'm not sad about anybody who leaves this year. This football team did not do well offensively. Defensively, I would have liked to keep as many of those players as we possibly could. If we go back and look at the PFF ratings for the entire year, some of the folks we're talking about offensively, believe it or not, Miles Montgomery, as much maligned as he was elsewhere, and also on this show, when we were asking the question, is he the guy to start? He was the #1 rated PFF offensive player at 76.4. Jaden Nixon right behind him at 71. Dylan Wade behind both of them at 70.2, and then Dwayne Thomas Jr. at 69.1. We're keeping Dwayne Thomas Jr., which seems to be a good thing. He announced that. And we're keeping a couple of other players. It's kind of weird because you get the reverse mojo of the guys that are re-announcing their commitment to UCF. It's just such a weird experience, right? Wade Charles, we obviously invested in him again. He was starting to show as a true freshman that he had some talent. We've got Day Farmer and a few others waiting in the wings. I'm kind of waiting on him. He's back. Day had some stories on his Instagram showing that he was back from his injury and working out again. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. As far as offensive line is concerned, Preston Cushman and Keegan Smith were the two most highly rated offensive linemen at 65 and 63.2. Both of those guys will, I don't think, are coming back. And then Paul Rubelt, believe it or not, above average at 61.7, then Carter Miller at 61.6, and then a whole host of others. And Cameron Kinney, who started at center towards the end of the season for us, 58.6. Unfortunately, he kind of defaulted. He was our third string center, which is never a good thing for an offensive line. But surprisingly enough, we had just about half of our team on offense. So both running backs, our starting tight end, our two receivers, including Chris Dahmerkamp, two offensive linemen, Cam Fancher, actually 3 offensive linemen, were above a 60. So what that means is that they were average or just slightly above average as far as what their production was for the entire year. The rest of them, basically, it's a complete turnover, right? Kylan Fox, we just lost him. We were expecting a lot out of him, 52.4. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, we get Malachi Lawrence back, hopefully. Or no, is Malachi back this year? Or is he?
No, he graduated.
Yeah. So he led the way at 83.1. Jaden Bellamy at 80.1. Horace Lockett, who we do get back, was an 80, and he looked great when he was out there. He just got injured. Nigel Kelly, 77.6. Philip Dunham, 76.8. Cole Kozlowski, 76.1. It'll be interesting with Cole. One of the things that was going on today was an update on a lawsuit that's happening, which basically is seeking to give players who came from the FCS an extra year, and they're going and trying to go for 5 for 5 for college instead of 4 for 4, and eliminating the red shirt entirely. So there were some rulings made on that today, but they're expected a final ruling in the next 1 to 2 weeks or so. So Cole Kozlowski, that would be a huge win if we could get him back, and a few others as well. But as far as the defense is concerned, those folks that were grading, including Sincere Edwards at 64.7, pretty much the entire defense except for Kelly Lawson, for anybody who had meaningful snaps, was above a 60. And the vast majority of them, 3/4 of them, were above a 69, which means that should tell you how good this defense actually was, because most of these guys fell in the 70s and even into the 80s, which is elite level defense. So anything from our defensive backs and things like that, Alan, what do you think about our core and bringing that group back?
For the defensive backs?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some exciting guys. I mean, at the end of the day, we did have a top 30 secondary in terms of passing yards allowed. And I know there may be some caveats there that maybe more teams ran on us a little bit more than passed. But I think the secondary had one of the biggest jumps of any of the position groups on the team. I mean, we're 2 years removed or 3 years removed from being, 130 30th in passing yards allowed in the country. I think it was like Gus's second year when that happened. So I do think there are some exciting guys to bring back. I mean, I think you have some core pieces like a Damari Henderson that you're going to want to bring back, a Braden Marshall at the nickel position. And I think some of the transfers really hit when you talk about Jaden Bellamy and Jaden Williams and some of these guys. They hit pretty good. Philip Dunham, I know he's graduating, but I think Frost did an excellent job filling out the secondary with really strong transfers. And then when you talk about some of the core guys from secondary guys from the Gus era, like I said, the Hendersons and Marshall, there's definitely some exciting pieces that could come back. I mean, I know he was a little bit maligned, but even someone like an Antoine Jackson, I think he had some good moments on special teams, in punt returns, and then he had some games in the secondary. I know a lot of people didn't like him, but I think he had some core moments. When you talk about a guy like maybe like a DJ Bell who started to come on later in the year, there's definitely some pieces here that I personally would like to bring back. Definitely Jaden Bellamy. I mean, he had that awesome couple games. What sticks out is that that game-saving tackle he had against Jacksonville State. Then I think even too some of the young freshmen that were recruited. I know we saw Tony Williams enter the transfer portal, but maybe a guy like Raheem Stroud, who was in last year's class. And then, most of these transfers that came in were either redshirt juniors or redshirt seniors. The only one that I think for sure is graduating is Philip Dunham, which obviously is a loss. And then maybe Jaden Williams, because he's a redshirt senior. I don't know with the whole COVID year if that means he can come back or not, but I'd like to see him come back if possible. But I think they are going to have to fill out the secondary with at least a few transfers, because there are guys that have already entered the portal. There's guys that are graduating. I'm sure there will be more. And this is actually becoming a very, very veteran group. If you look at most of the secondary, pretty much everyone is an upperclassman outside of like maybe 3 or 4 guys. But yeah, I definitely would want to bring back some of these, guys from this year, because I do think it was a good secondary.
So, I want to talk about that too, because, but I want to talk about this when we get to the coaches, because we've got some interesting things to talk about with the coaches and specifically in the secondary as well. But before we do that, let's talk about this. I want to ask this question. Fernando Mendoza, right? He was a 2-star recruit. He came to Indiana. They, did what they did, and you saw where he ended up. Do you think the strategy is better to pick off guys that were recruited highly and bring them over in the NIL portal, even if they didn't get any playing time? Or do you think it's a better strategy to bring up some of these 2-star, 3-star guys that popped at whatever their level was, whether it was FCS, because we've had success, especially in defensive backs with FCS players, or even 3-star guys that are at some of these G6 schools and bringing them into the program? What do you think is the better capital spend, and what's the right mix there?
So for the Power 5, you're saying guys that haven't produced yet at their current schools, but were big names in high school, essentially?
Yeah, so guys that got recruited, or they went to the Alabamas of the world, or they went to I don't know, Clemson or one of these other named schools that
Right.
they're always recruit well. They didn't see much playing time. Either they're the first year or second year, so they're either freshmen or redshirt freshmen, and or sophomores. Which do you think is the better buy? Do you think it's those folks that have proven it at their level and the G5, G6/FCS, because it seems like we've had a lot of success with them, because they showed that they can produce at their level and they could potentially step up to ours? Or do you think it's a better buy to, get that redshirt freshman or redshirt sophomore that hasn't had playing time at one of these other schools, but showed the physical attributes to be able to get to an Alabama or to whatever straight out of high school?
I mean, for me, it's an easy answer. I'm gonna go with the G6 guy that's proven it. First of all, I think when you talk about these Power 5 highly recruited guys, they are going to want a salary. I mean, it's been talked about. A lot of these guys are living off of their high school name and the fact that they flashed in high school and had all these offers. So other schools see that and they're willing to throw money at them. So first of all, I don't even know if UCF can afford some of those, but let's say the ones that we can. Maybe it's recency bias, but I mean, everything in the transfer portal is recent. So and yes, Frost is a different coach than Gus Malzahn, but every single defensive back that Malzahn brought in the portal era that was highly recruited out of high school for the most part has been a massive bust. I mean, there's no way around it. That most of them have Cedric Hawkins, Traquan Fagans, guys like that were huge recruits. Notre Dame, Alabama, USC guys
Ohio
we're talking
State.
about here. Ohio State, they were massive busts that didn't even see the field. Then you
But
look
is that the coaching or is that the players?
right. I think you could make a case for both. I think coaching probably went into it. But for me, look at what Philip Dunham did this year. This is a guy that was a low 3-star recruit in high school, went to FAU, played 4 years for FAU, regardless of how bad or good FAU was. If you're on the field from freshman year to your senior year contributing, you're a talented player. At the end of the day, it's FAU may not be Ohio State, but they're not they're a FBS school. They're one of 100 and whatever 36 schools. So if you're playing all 4 years, it's for a reason. So yeah, I'd much rather go and do that. Look what we saw this year. Pretty much every DB that contributed was from a G6 school. There was a couple exceptions. Obviously, there was a couple guys that played from Power 5. But yeah, if you ask me, would I rather go get another Philip Dunham or another Jaden Williams who's played 3 or 4 years and shown that they can contribute, led their previous team in interceptions and key stats versus, the guys that showed the physical attributes but just maybe hasn't broken through yet? I think at DB, if you're asking me specifically, I'd rather do that. Now, if you're talking about a different position like a wide receiver, I might say go after the Alabama guy because sometimes those guys are ready to pop. They're just behind like surefire NFL players. And I think contributing at wide receiver might be, I don't know if the word is easier, but it might be a little bit easier not playing. So for me, having not played as much minutes before, as much reps before, but defensive back, I just think just given what we've seen, and yes, you make a good point about coaching, but I think the proof was in the pudding the last year. I mean, every big transfer that UCF got at DB that contributed this year was from a G6 school. So, I'm not saying, that, if it's, they've had to have at least contributed, right? If it's maybe just like, they played minimally and were maybe like a backup guy at a G6 for 1 year versus that at a Power 5, I'd probably go the Power 5. But if you're talking about someone that's contributed multiple years, I'd rather take the chance on them personally, as long as they also are physically there and they look like they can compete at a Power 4 level. So to me, we've seen it. I mean, look at, and it's not just at DB. Look at all the stories we have this year. I mean, look at who are one of our all conference players was Cole Kozlowski. He was all Big 12 third team, and he came from FCS, right? So, I mean, for me, I think that would be my answer.
Okay. Well, Cole was a little bit of a different story too because he came from an Ivy, right? So it's a little bit different than a traditional FCS. But your point's valid. I think the biggest thing is high school classes are getting smaller. I think we need to be more choosy and concentrate our dollars on those that we decide to spend big on, right? I think that, when it comes to high school players, on average, typically only 20%, I think the statistic was 22% of the players that you got in high school actually saw the field and became contributors, right? So if we say we got 13, I think, or 15 that we're going to sign by the time spring rolls around because of some academic stuff. Let's say that's 15 players, right? You're really only talking about 3 players now with this size of a class per class that are going to end up being meaningful contributors for your team every single high school cycle.
Right.
Also, you've got more and more players, especially if we go with this 5-year aspect that's going to be going through. You've got more and more players that are there with experience that are going to be available in the portal, and it's easier for them to transfer. Now, as we think about that, the original question was, do we think the strategy is to go after guys that were recruited and were on the Alabamas of the world, or do we go after guys that have shown it on the field, but we only get them for a year or two? I think the problem with getting guys only for a year or so, like basically paid mercenaries, is getting them in a system. I think it limits your ability to put the system in. We saw that with Scottfrost this year. He only got about 30% of his plays in because our whole team, including offensive linemen, were basically, new guys. So I do think that I think that you need to get guys optimally that have 2 years left, right? 1 year to get into the rotation, but not necessarily be the starter is the sweet spot. I do think that you do go heavy on the G6 right now based on what we're competing with financially.
Yeah, I was
right?
gonna say financial matters here too, right? So
Yeah, right. What we're competing with financially, right? But I do think you need to sprinkle and concentrate some dollars on guys that you think will pop. High school class is smaller, means you can take more chances on those guys that are, because if they're at Alabama, they don't see the field for 2 years. They're highly rated players. It's no different than a coach just trying to rehab themselves. Come to UCF, work yourself back up, and then maybe for the final year, if you don't make the NFL, then you transfer again, right? That's kind of the cycle that we're in right now. And I think that sweet spot for us is getting those guys from those players that have the physical attributes, that have been in a weight room for 2 years at a successful college football program, that aren't going to ask as much because their star has started to wane since they haven't made it on the field, so they don't need to command as much. That's almost our replacement for that second high school group to me, right? Guys that are redshirt juniors, or I'm sorry, redshirt sophomores, ideally, or redshirt juniors that have those 2 years left. I think you do a third there, you do, and then you do the rest on portal players that are either P4 level that are looking for a new home, or high level G6 players that have shown it on the field. You just have to be careful how many new players that you're rotating in. To your point, when we started this conversation, having that core is important, or just as important as well, because otherwise you won't be able to install your system. And you can't coach if you can't install your system. You can't get good if you're not being able to repeat those things that you're doing over and over and over and over again. Or you have to do it super simple and kind of go, what the pirate used to do, which is he used to do really, really simple concepts, but drill them over and over and over and over again until people could do it in their sleep. So that's kind of where you're at. I think Scottfrost, his system is complicated, which means you're going to have guys that stick around for a couple of years for him to fully implement it. And you're going to have guys that continuously rotate. So getting those guys with at least 2 years, and again, that redshirt sophomore, preferably redshirt sophomores would be who I would be targeting, that have the physical attributes to bring them in so that they get at least a year in the system. Then they get in the field for a year, and then they, either take their shot or stick around for a third year, and you just keep rotating it. Kind of like what Kansas State used to do with their offensive linemen, right? They would get all these guys as walk-ons and then rotate them, and then all of a sudden the third year they're starters. I think it's kind of the same type of concept there, because we have to have some sort of continuity and guys to have at least a year in our system to be able to install or maintain a system. Because otherwise, what's the point of having, you can't hire for a coach's system anymore because you'll never be able to implement it.
Yeah. I mean, just, for me, when it comes to DB to hammer one more point home, the last two UCF defensive backs that have been drafted, one, Mac McWilliams, where did he play before UCF? UAB, a group of 6. And then Tay Gowan, where did he play before UCF? He played at Miami of Ohio. So just some food for thought there compared to some other DBs that, we got from LSU and, places like that.
So speaking of DBs, this is kind of what I was mentioning earlier. We had some news on the coaching front. Obviously, DB coach Brandon Harris, the one who guided that successful DB room, was supposed to go to FSU, left UCF. His brother went to FSU with Gus, was going to go to FSU, but then got snaked by Florida. So he was going there. He got the offer, accepted the offer verbally, didn't sign anything yet. Florida swooped in, offered him $700,000 to $800,000. He was making $275,000 here at UCF. Offered him $700,000 to $800,000. It was about $775,000 to go be the coach at UF. Then they went and snaked his brother from FSU as well. So, it's crazy because, a lot of UCF staff has gone to FSU. FSU is trying to poach UCF staff, and now UF is poaching UCF staff from FSU to go to UF. It's crazy times, right? So money talks, and unfortunately, Brandon Harris was great for us as far as our DBs were concerned. He was a rising star, former NFL player. Like really, really, really excited to have him on our roster, and now it looks like he's going to UF. So it'll be interesting to see who we bring in to replace him, especially as we go into portal season, because we're going to need to replace him fairly quickly. Same way, offensive line coach, we were expecting that to be announced this past week. It has not happened. And going into portal season, it's going to be even more important that we have someone that makes the splash higher. Last week we asked the question, okay, would you rather, get an online coach in this particular cycle, or do you, right away, or do you wait until the coaching carousel that we just went through, which got even crazier with, Penn State finally hiring Matt Campbell. That creates a lot of movement with regard to the assistant coaching pool and who is available for online coach. And it's going to be critical for us to get a good one, not just for the ability to coach and play, but also the ability to recruit and to get guys in the portal that are going to want to play for that coach. So it'll be really, really, really interesting to see who we get. Now, as of last year, the coaching salaries were posted. Alex Grinch made $850,000 as a D coordinator, which is more than UCF D coordinators have made in the past. We are going to need to give him a raise, in my opinion, because he's worth it. Steve Cooper, offensive coordinator and tight ends coach, $475,000. That was someone who was brought in by Scottfrost, and who's worked with him in the past. Kenny Martin, defensive tackles, $425,000. Mike Dawson, defensive run game / edge. I thought, he's making $425,000. Sean Beckton, wide receivers, UCF royalty, $400,000. Mark D'Onofrio, linebackers, $350,000. Brandon Harris was making $275,000. Mackenzie Milton's making $275,000. Jimmy Beal, running backs coach, $225,000. And Pete Alomar, special teams coordinator, $50,000, which I thought he would be paid more because he had a pretty big reputation within college football for being a good coordinator. So Alex Grinch this upcoming year is due to make $950,000. Can we hold on to a lot of these guys where we do find success, or is this going to be something of a a regular occurrence as well, because you know, we talk about continuity. Part of continuity is coaching, and there has to be something done, because this coaching carousel that we had this last year, you can't do that. I actually heard someone, a personality, say that they believe that the current rules and everything that happened this past year is actually good for college football, because it was the first time that schools, you know, for NIL, it was the first time that schools like Texas Tech had success, or Indiana had success since the 70s. I'm sorry, but that's a very myopic view if you're just going to reward those that have the most cash on hand. As far as the health of the support of the sport is concerned, that has to change. This coaching craziness has to change. As much as we harp on the players on what they're asking and how crazy it is in the Wild Wild West, the fact that you're gutting a program every couple of years, right, for these coaching staffs to move around is just as bad as what it is for those players. And I actually pinged the guy who put it, pretty well-known personality, and I said, "You are so off base. I'd love to debate it with you." So we'll see if he takes that up. He takes me up on that, but I think that absolutely kills the sport. So we have to, really, really take a hard look at it. I've been screaming at the top of my lungs for years about this, about getting collective bargaining. That has to happen from the player side, but we also have to get the coaching side under control. Otherwise, we're not going to have a sport to play anymore, or at least one that people will watch. And I don't want it to get to the point where people start walking away from college football, the casual fan, or the quote unquote t-shirt fan, the person who didn't graduate from the school. I don't want us to start losing that money and that many fans to get to a point where it ruins the sport before they wake up. And you see guys like Danny White that's proposing stuff, and other P4 schools are now getting to the point. And I think, as you see, like with Ole Miss and that whole drama with LSU, as more and more of that happens, eventually commissioners like the SEC, the Big 10, the Big 12, they're going to have to get involved. They're just going to have to get involved, and they've got to stop it. Like, it can't be an arms race forever. So now that's led to, schools like Utah taking a $500 million PE deal to, just to compete. And now the Big 12 has also announced they were originally messing around with a private equity firm to secure funding for the Big 12. That kind of got poo-pooed. We backed away from it. Now it's come out that it looks like the Big 12 is going to sign on to a deal with a private equity firm. However, the difference is they're not going to own 20% of the conference. They're going to only go for $500 million for the whole conference, and that leaves about $30 million. It's Redbird Capital that they're looking to sign this with. That leaves $30 million per school and $20 million for the conference as a line of credit. So unlike the Big 10, it isn't going to force people to take that money. I think that's actually a smarter move. If you are UCF, knowing PE and how it works, and also, thinking about that line of credit, do you spend that money? Do you dip into that, or do you think UCF is going to be more, quote unquote, fiscally responsible with that?
I don't really I see like people trashing that whole thing online. Like, I don't really understand. Is this like similar to the Utah thing? Can you kind of explain it, like how this would work?
Yeah, Utah's a little bit different, right? So Utah's deal is kind of similar to what the Big 12 was originally talking about in June, right? There was some noise about that. We talked about it on here. But basically, Utah's deal was, hey, we're going to take a percentage ownership of your athletics department from the school, right? So in our case, it would be the DSO. We're going to take a percentage of that ownership of that in exchange for giving you this cash. What the Big 12 is doing is a little bit different. They are providing a line of credit.
This is, us or Utah?
That was Utah, right?
Okay, so what we're doing.
And that's also what the Big 12 was originally going to do. Big 12 was talking about getting a cash infusion for 20% of the conference, owning 20% of the conference, right? So that means all media rights deals, like everything, all the conference revenue that comes in. Now what it's kind of transitioned to is every single school, all 16 schools, will have access to a $30 million line of credit. So it's like a pot of money that's sitting out there from the PE firm without giving up ownership to the schools. So for example, Utah would have 500 million plus they'd have another 30 million available as a revolving line of credit to spend as they see fit. Now, is it good terms as far as rate is concerned? No. If you don't pay your bill, what ends up happening, either the academic side ends up paying for the bill or you will lose. The problem with PE is whenever they get involved, they start making decisions or influencing decisions. And they're giving the conference $20 million, by the way, as well. So it'll be 16 by 30 on lines of credit. And then it'll be another 20 million for the conference to draw off of to reinvest in doing conference things, right? So the question is if you're UCF's AD, Terry Mohajer, and I know TikTok Terry probably won't take the risk. He's been on a mission for fiscal responsibility, but do you dip into that line of credit?
What are the downsides? Like, is it?
It's a couple of things. One is the interest, right? It's probably less than what they could get on their own, but it's more than what they could raise if they were out there doing it in other means, right? So you're paying debt service on that. And two, that allows the PE firms to have more influence over conference decisions, and because they're basically a stakeholder at the table and they hold the purse strings. And if you've got $30 million in debt to a PE firm, you better believe they're going to lean on you to make the decisions that they want to make for the conference as well, because they're trying to optimize their revenue. I'm not a big fan of private equity firms, because usually what happens in the business space is they will try to acquire as much as they can or influence decisions. So think about decisions like, okay, if a conference wants to bring on another member, right? And the PE firm has a certain school that they want to bring in based on whatever financial rationale they have, or because there's a former booster on there. They will have the ability to influence and have a seat at the table in those discussions versus just the schools and the Big 12 conference. It's a slippery slope. PE firms typically want either more influence or to influence decisions to give them more ownership of the entity. And ultimately, normally in big business, what ends up happening is they strip things for parts and they sell off those things, they file bankruptcy, and then they turn things back around. So private equity, there are some good private equity firms, but it's something that I personally wouldn't want to see us involved in. And if we do, we shouldn't dip into it for more. But what it does do is it gives us equity to TDT fund, or access to TDT funds. Plus it gives us an extra $30 million of a personal business line of credit, basically, for the school. So, do you spend it? What would you use it on?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's a tough call. I mean, to me, it seems like the downside there could potentially outweigh the upside. I mean, I guess if we do get it, though, we can we pull like a Texas Tech and just start buying a lot of players with it? I mean, how
you can use it. We will have access to it. Like that's everybody will have the rights, part of the deal with the Big 12 conference, to have access to it. It's just a question of, do we use it and how much do we use and what do you want to spend it on? So is it like facilities upgrades? Is it NIL for a short term? Is it?
For me, it's got to be NIL. Like they're already making facility upgrades. I mean, the whole Roth Tower and all these other things that they're doing. I mean, it's like the facility upgrades, I know they matter, but UCF has made strides there. Like we keep going back to this, like we're going to be entering year 4 in the Big 12, and we haven't been remotely competitive in football. And it's just time. Like clearly the teams that are spending money on players are the ones that are succeeding. And I know there might be examples of some that may have spent and fell flat on their face, but the fact is the whole like diamond mining thing and all of that from UCF's past is dead to a degree, right? I mean, you might be able to find a guy that is a diamond in the rough, but he has a good year. He's going to command a lot of money and then dip out. So if you don't have the money to retain him, there's going to be no sort of consistency, no sort of being able to build a consistent winner, and it's just not sustainable. So to me, yeah, I think if you're going to dip into that, you got to spend it on players. Like clearly we are behind in that respect, like in being able to pay for players. So if you get, you know, the infusion of cash that we already got from being a full share and all these things, and then I guess with this, you know, maybe it's selling your soul to the devil, but I don't think UCF, like I feel like we keep waiting for UCF football to turn it around, and I don't see the vision for that with how we currently spend on players. Like it's just like if you're spending whatever it is we spent to get Taven Jackson and some of these guys, like it's just not working. Like you got to get either better players or you have to hit on a bunch of G5 transfers. Like you have to have like a million Philip Dunhams and guys like that, and that's not really realistic either. Like,
so how do
I'm
you
not
make
saying
that
we're
money
gonna
back on that? But let's be real. Okay, so let's have that conversation. So Texas Tech spends 51 million on NIL. Now, granted, the whole point about all this stuff with the selling the fact that we were going to be able to pay the players as rev share was that NIL was going away by and large, right? That's been reversed.
It's not away.
Well, it was reversed, right? We shut down our collective. When Gus was here, we had a couple of big donors that bought into his vision. He was able to bring donors that could pay for players in, right? Terry might be good with the donors for like facilities and stuff, but the football program, that was all Gus Malzahn. That was his name. That was him selling his vision. He was good at that. Scottfrost just got back. He doesn't have the deep pockets that he's pulling in from elsewhere. So when Gus Malzahn left, some of that money went out the door, right? However, if we go and we leverage ourselves, let's say we spend, you know, to be competitive with Texas Tech, we would need to spend the full 30 million, right? Or at least 20 million. So you spend 20 million one season and it's a bust, you still owe that $20 million plus interest. Where are you going to make up $20 million in revenue? The only way, and this is, you know, this is the cow strategy. The only way that it makes sense for them to do that is to get them a boost in revenue by moving up in conferences, right? So that might make sense. They spend on the facilities, they spend on the NIL, but they're backed internally by the academic side because they've got a $500 million, you know, they've got a $500 million, not piggy bank, but they've got the ability to dip into that $500 million that we have versus our $200 million endowment. And so our endowment is basically where the Cows endowment was back in 2007, 2008. We don't have that luxury. But if you spend that $20 million, where are you going to return the revenue? You're not going to make $20 million in ticket sales. Our stadium isn't big enough, right? You're not going to make it in merch sales. So where do you make that up? Is it to win now and then what? You still got to pay that 20 million back plus interest. So again, that 30 million has to be turned into revenue generating opportunities. And, you know, that's what the whole point with the Cabana was. Was it because, you know, the East Side wasn't getting anybody sitting in the East Side because it was directly in the sun. So those ticket sales at the 50 were down. So they invested in the Cabana. They gussied it up a little bit. They leaned on that and they were able to generate revenue. I don't even see any revenue neutral opportunities with there. So I don't think you're going to be able to spend enough to make a difference, to return enough of the income to make a difference. Now, the only time that makes sense is if we truly believe there's an existential threat of the Big 12 being pulled apart in 2030. If that makes sense, then if you're expecting that, then you gamble on that now. But UCF's not in a position like a lot of these other schools where they can just lean on their endowment and say, hey, give me that 20 milli, or give me that 30 milli so I can pay these guys off, right? So
right. Yeah.
I think that's the challenge with all of this. So it has to be, if you're going to spend any of that 30 million, it's got to be in stuff that's going to generate more income. For example, the tower. What does the tower do? It allows us to have more suites. That suites was a net positive, even with the spend. It was a net positive cash infusion of $1.5 to $2 million per year, right, to our bottom line. Not to mention, it gives us the ability to have more events that we can draw to the stadium, which is what we do with it. When we're not using it for football season. And you have all of the spaces, not just the seats that are only used 6 and can be monetized 6 to 8 times a year, right? But you also have all the floor space and conference space, et cetera, that's being expanded on there for people to use to make money off of the stadium as well. So that was a revenue positive move. I don't see how you can do that with players in NIL. I don't think it solves that problem, because I don't see how you make more revenue that way.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough call. I mean, I guess if you're all of a sudden in debt to this fund or company or whatever, I guess that's not ideal either. Especially like you said, if it's you drop whatever it is, 30 million for a year, and it's a bust. But I don't know.
Even if it was successful, how much extra money could you make, right? If you think about what you make in the playoff, you do, every team that participates, and the further you get in the championship games, you do make a little back, but it will never be $20 million worth.
Yeah, that's true. But like, what I don't, okay, like UCF keeps, I guess, like public in a sense, like crying poor or whatever. But like, I don't understand, like with the rev share, the 20 million or whatever it is, and I know we don't have a quote unquote collective, but I don't understand. Like, it doesn't seem like, I know we're not an even playing field with the super big schools, but like we seemingly are not using the extra money on players. Like, I don't understand, like when we say we can't retain certain guys, like we talk about John Walker, and I'm not saying we should have spent big money on, but like, where is this extra money that we just got by being full share members of the Big 12, and then this rev share stuff, and then any donations that are coming in from boosters or however it is now, because this whole thing still confuses me a little bit. Why is that not going towards like players like we see almost every other school doing, like Cincinnati and BYU? And I know they have bigger endowments and all that stuff, but like, it seems like it's more money than we had 2 years ago. So where is that going?
Well, part of it is going to this rev share, but it's table stakes now in the P4 to do rev share. The way that we have ours set up, about 17% of what we have is being broken down in football. About 13% is going to the football roster, right? So
why is it like, don't we have extra money now? Like, why isn't like bigger?
I'm sorry, 17 million, not 17%. 17 million is going to football. 13 million of that is going to rev share. And so the problem is, or the opportunity, however you want to look at it, rev share is a fixed amount that you can spend as a percentage of how much your conference earns, up to $20 million. We have chosen rev share. The way it is in place right now is a cap, essentially, of how much you can share with your student athletes, not just football, your entire athletic department, right? How much you can share with those student athletes. And of that, it's capped at 20 million, and that'll go up a little bit over the next couple of years, because originally it was meant to curtail this NIL marketplace that we've had, because they were going to eliminate the marketplace, cap everybody at 20 million. There's also a caveat in there that says in the future that cap can be adjusted for teams that have based off of a percentage of how much they earn from their media rights deal. So, for example, it still would have helped the SEC and the Big Ten, because they're making $70 million a year versus our 40 whatever, right? 47, 50 by the end of the contract. So again, they would have had an advantage, but not as much of an advantage because that NIL wouldn't be there. The way UCF is spending it is they're spending about $13 million on their roster. The rest of that $20 million, 5% of it is going to women's sports. So new scholarships for, soccer, softball, some money going to women's basketball, etc. The rest of it, so we've got about a $13 million pool that we can draw from every year. What differentiates us from Texas Tech, and it's even worse this year than it was last year, is Texas Tech spent $51 million, right? Because they had that billionaire booster. That's private money. That's not rev-share money. And they spent all their money and signed all their contracts for 4-year contracts or however long it was going to be. Like Lee Hunter isn't a 4-year contract. They paid those out right before the new rules came in that capped it, right? So now they have another $20 million because they've already paid for the other roster. Now they've got another $20 million that they can spend again this year. So they're not penalized for that, right? And on top of that, they've got the NIL collectives that they have. And that's really the big difference.
Why don't we have an NIL collective? Like, why would we disband?
Terry shut it down. First of all, materially, right? Our collective versus someone like Texas Tech, it's not even close, right? Because to your point, we are just now getting billionaires, right? So we have our first crypto billionaire, right? And then we had some other large boosters like Riopol that were part of that we brought money in for the NIL pool. A large part of that too was that relationship with Gus Malzahn. Now, our crypto billionaire or millionaire, whatever he is, he is still involved with the program because he was a UCF graduate. Most of our big boosters were not UCF graduates. In fact, our biggest booster for a long, long time was an ECU graduate who was an Orlando native and paid a lot of money to us. And you'll see his name everywhere. So our problem is, one, we're behind the 8 ball because Terry decided to shut down the NIL early. 2, you saw this most recently, that the fundraising efforts finally at the board meeting, they said they're consolidating the board, the fundraising efforts. So that will help with NIL, but we're still behind the 8 ball, and we're not at a position. We're still behind the 8 ball because the measure that they put in place to get the rev-share pass, which was a cap on the NIL, went away. The only difference is now versus where it was before is that anything over $600 has to be approved by the clearinghouse as an actual NIL deal versus just pay for play. The challenge is we destroyed our NIL infrastructure. So what little infrastructure we had on the collective went away because we thought it was going away in favor of rev-share. And so we're behind the 8 ball on that. So we have a $13 million, at least a $13 million right now that we can spend on the roster in the portal. But when you've got one guy, whether it be a quarterback or Lee Hunter, that's making $1.2 to $1.5 million, for a defensive lineman, you've only got $13 million to spare. How do you spread that out and make it work at UCF? Because other schools have that. If they did it the exact same way we did, they'd have that 13 million plus, $15, $20 million in NIL. So that's what happened. That's why we're behind the 8 ball. And that's the challenge that we have. But we do need to get moving. We do need to get our NIL back in place. You are seeing UCF consolidate. I talked about that in the board. I think they missed the boat on the marketing on that. And I think Terry jumped the gun. And so it's put us behind the 8 ball for this season in shutting down our NIL collective.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess that's why I guess a lot of people want Terry fired.
Well, among other things, you know how I feel about Terry Mohajir. But at the end of the day, that's the answer. That's the answer, to your question. And then secondarily, it's okay, if we spend the 30 million, what do we spend it on? We can't really spend that 30 million on NIL because if we do, we'll never get the return on the investment for that. It's just basically the only thing it would be a way for us to have a line of credit where we could spend a little extra NIL every year that we could spend on that. And then, you know, to be honest with you, I don't even know if we could, because NIL is supposed to be a separate entity from the DSO or UCF athletics. So the Big Ten, the way they're doing it is they're driving all of their NIL contracts now through the conference. So it isn't at the individual school level. It's actually being paid out in shares of the Big Ten conference. So it's really, really interesting on how that's being done. UCF isn't there. The Big 12 is not going to be there, but we do have that $30 million. I don't even know if we could spend it on NIL ourselves, because it is a DSO, which is separate from part of the school, right? It's not, UCF doesn't own the DSO, but it does control the DSO, if that makes any sense. So technically, UCF AA, which is athletics, which is the DSO, would be the one that would have access to that line of credit. It's just a question of whether the school wants to back it or not if it goes sideways. So I think if you're going to use it for that, it has to be judicious, but that's why you can't spend $30 million on the players and just, you know, cha-ching.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I just know that it doesn't feel like we're getting any closer to competing, because the players are just, as a whole, are just not good enough. I mean, quarterback, offensive line, and I know there was some circumstances and whatnot, but like every position group on offense was not up to par, really. Maybe better than Oklahoma State, and that's it. Like, we just did not have that many good players on offense, and it's not like we're one piece away or two pieces away.
Alan, well, I mean, how many pieces were we really away? We just got through saying
the entire offenses. Like,
well,
besides
that's the key, right? Defensively, we did really, really well. So how much of that is portal luck? Hold on, let me finish. Yeah. How much of that is portal luck, time, and giving the coaching staff the ability to go have time? Because offense, it's much easier. I won't say easier. It is less difficult when you're going to try to hire defensive staff versus offensive staff, in my opinion. Like, and by that I mean players. Offensive players, the market is a lot higher and you have to spend more. A linebacker is going to cost you, although they're expensive, they might cost you at a P4 level 400 to 450,000, right? But a wide receiver is going to cost you 800 to $1 million. A quarterback's going to run 1.2 to 1.8 million for some of these, you know, per year, if you're playing for Georgia or Ohio State or someone like that. So to get good at defense is different. The question is, how do you scheme your offense, and how do you get the right players that you can afford cheaper and use the scheme to make yourself consistently good? Which is why the BYUs of the world, they weren't world beaters on offense. They had really, really good defenses that can run the ball, right? So we're back to George O'Leary football again. So how can Scottfrost do the same thing with his scheme, right? Again, I think we can do it if Scottfrost has the time to go and hire, or I keep saying hire because that's really what it is, right? To go recruit the players that he needs to be decent enough to lean on the scheme to be able to do what they need to do to win the ball on the offensive side of the ball, because I think we can compete defensively. We're not going to be Texas Tech and pay Lee Hunter $1.2 million. Can we pay a defensive lineman $800,000, $600,000, $700,000? Maybe, but we've got a $13 million pool to play with. So we have to be really, really careful of what we're doing. So you're taking bigger bets because other schools have the ability to take bets on developmental players. Hey, they look like they could be good, but they may not work out, right? We have to concentrate our funds. We either take a spread approach where we say, hey, we're going to pay a bunch of players from the G6, like we talked about, and some of the players that didn't get playing time at the bigger schools, and hope. And that's our developmental guys, right? That are redshirt sophomores or redshirt juniors. Or, we concentrate our funds in big hits or misses on offense. That's really what you're playing with. And that's the GM. We have an entire position that's there to come up with that strategy. The problem is we're playing with two hands tied behind our back because we don't have the NIL, right? And that's on Terry. He should have never shut that down so quickly. There's a reason schools waited until an agreement was signed. And do you really think the Big 12 and the Big 10 and the SEC was going to walk away from what made them different and allowed them to separate themselves if everybody had a cap? Nope. And that's what happened.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess so. It's tough. What a weird era of college football.
Well, it's got to change. That's it. It has to in order for the sport to survive. We were talking about, okay, does FAU, we went from back when all this started with conferences, right? We went from, okay, all of college football matters to some degree. Obviously, you had Alabama's of the world, but guess what? You had Javier Borlegui, kicking a field goal to beat Alabama at homecoming by the largest point total that had ever been put on Alabama at a homecoming game ever. Would that happen in this era? No. Now, some schools are offsetting that. So like JMU just announced every student that they have pays $3,000 per semester for a student athletic fee. So if you think that UCF is expensive for a student athletic fee, you're talking about someone who's going to be paying, if they go 3 semesters, $9,000 a year for a student athletic fee in their tuition at JMU. That's why they're, where they're at right now and have continued to do well through the transition from the FCS. UCF's not going to put that on the students, so we have to get the donor base involved. Yeah. Because we can't lean on the line of credit because there's not enough. The problem that you have is you have to have people that are willing to spend the money. They're spending the money on the entertainment of being able to watch a good football team. That's what they're spending. There's no return on it other than their entertainment value. UCF doesn't have that, right? So we have to find those boosters and rebuild that cachet. And I think where we do have an advantage is strength in numbers, but Terry's got to get off his duff and do something he didn't do before, because his whole mantra has been, focus on a smaller pool of people that can give you $25,000, to be part of the shareholder society and develop those folks versus trying to engage the larger fan base who has less money to give. I think it's showing now that it's an and proposition, not an or proposition. And so we've got to be able to pivot and engage that way in order to be competitive financially, right? For all the reasons we talked about before. So speaking of Terry, one of the things that came up recently that I kind of wanted to talk about with Terry, as you mentioned earlier, we all have our feelings about Terry and whether he's the right guy to, basically lead us into the future. Someone did a thought exercise and actually asked AI what the difference was between the cows and us and our journey and who was right, who did things right or who did things better, why UCF was more successful, etc. The core difference was that UCF during that time, Genshaft was focusing on academics. UCF was more aggressive. We were out there, we were vocal, we had great marketing, self-promotional. We went out there and said, Natty Champs. We had a great marketing engine. We were constantly in people's faces. We didn't care if people liked us or not. We said what we said, and we were a national story for a long time. So people were aware of who UCF was. UCF, up until probably 10 years ago, nobody knew where UCF was. UCF has built a brand since 2017. It started earlier than that, but 2017 was really the demarcation point. And we're willing to manufacture legitimacy, right? And that we learned recently at the most recent board meeting how much we were mortgaging ourselves for the future financially, we didn't have a lot in the budget, but we went full force forward. And what Danny White was able to do was able to engage with the fan base. And that's the thing you said, there was no vision for where we go moving forward, right? You're asking me, well, what do we do, right? The fact that we're asking that question, what do we do or what are we doing? And we don't have our AD out at the front saying, this is what we're doing about this. You know, he's talking about, hey, yeah, we got the TDT funds. We've got the expansion. That's going to add money. That's great. But right now, the biggest problem that we have is the NIL. And this is what we've been talking about now. Where's our leadership? Why are we not in people's face? Why are we not telling the fan base what we need? Why are we not saying, hey, Roger, hey, Alan, I need you to give a little bit extra, whether it's $250 a month or it's $50 a month. We'll just auto deduct that out of your account. Drink like, I don't know, like 7 less Starbucks this month. We need you. Right? That's not happening. So that leadership being at the forefront, pushing our narrative, not being happy that we're here. That's the same thing that what the Cows did before. They relied on the fact that they were in the Big East to say, hey, that will carry us over and justify us. What are we doing as far as TikTok Terry is concerned? Terry Mohajer, I'll be, we joke about that, but Terry Mohajer, what's Terry Mohajer doing? Obviously, you haven't heard a message. I haven't heard a message. And now we've got this crisis of consciousness. And again, I'll say it again, 2030 is going to be a big year. The ACC is going to fold. In my opinion, it may not completely fold. There'll be schools left over, but I think it may go the way of the Pac-12. So what happens to either the rest of the schools that are there, right? Or if they get picked apart and some of the schools get pulled from the Big 12. We cannot sit on our laurels. We have to have the money. I do think this year's results was more of Scottfrost not having the time, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a vision right now for NIL.
Right. We don't.
And we've got to. That's where college football is right now. And whatever vision we had, got pulled. We had people spending $10, $15, $20, $25, $50 a month out of their paycheck going to this NIL fund. Is that a lot? No. At scale, is it a lot? It could be. But you got to have the marketing and the vision behind it to get people to participate. And we're not there. And that's my biggest problem is we've lost our chip on our shoulder. We've lost the ability to be comfortable being disliked. It feels like every time Terry is dealing with anybody at the higher levels and the power conferences, there's no brashness there. We're not aggressive. We're not promoting ourselves. We're just kind of there. And nobody's engaging with the fan base. And that's going to be a problem going forward if we don't get that fixed. Any thoughts you want to add to that?
No, I agree. It doesn't feel like we have any, like you said, everyone's screaming from the roof. Where is leadership? It's why AD Terry Mohajer has come under fire in recent, I would say, I guess the last year. It just feels, I think in some levels, the Olympic sports are stabilizing in the Big 12. You're seeing, a little bit more winning happening as a whole, but baseball, basketball, and football are just not going anywhere. I know basketball's 8-1 right now, but we'll talk about it. But in general, I know basketball's had some cool moments, but I'm saying like truly being competitive in the top 3 men's sports, it just doesn't seem like there's a vision. Like, and I know there's been coaching turnover in football, and I know we're behind resources and we're still somewhat young as a program, and we're definitely young in our Big 12 tenure. But at some point, there has to be a vision of how we are going to, the whole vision when we were in the AAC, Conference USA, the MAC, independent was move up a rung and succeed, move up a rung and succeed. And we did that. Now we're at this Big 12 and I don't see the vision to succeed at this, this next level. And like you said, we're barreling towards the ACC potentially being non-existent, and all these changes that, college football changes like AI does. It's like every day there's something new going on in college football. And it just, does not feel like we're prepared. And when you see our counterparts like Cincinnati, I won't even count BYU. When you just look at Cincinnati, Houston, and SMU, who were in the same conference for us for decades or whatever, a little over a decade, and they have had significantly more success than us in football specifically. All three teams have been ranked within the last 12 months, even if they didn't finish ranked. SMU made a playoff. Cincy and Houston had great years, at least relative to their first few years, and made significant leaps as programs. Cincinnati had a brand new coach, so we can't even use that excuse. Houston had a brand new coach, so we can't use that excuse. It just doesn't, and I know they have more money, whatever, but I don't see anything improving. It's just the same thing. And I know, maybe it will turn around under Frost, but yeah, I agree with you that it starts at the top and I don't see a vision there. And it really concerns me. Like, I felt like every time UCF in the past, and granted, it was under the old system of college football, not how it is now. Every time we had a down year, the 4-8s, even the 0-12 year, I always knew we would get back on track. I was always very confident. Now, I don't know when this downward spiral ends. I don't know when we're even an 8 or 9 win team. I don't think it's next year. I don't know if it's 2 years from now, maybe, but I don't feel that confidence. And it starts with, because I don't know what the vision is. It's either super secretive or there is none. And that's just kind of how I feel. And I feel very concerned. Every year on my page, I do like a state of the program. And this is like the first time where I've really felt like I have no idea what the state is, but I don't feel like it's positive.
Well, I think you could do a very quick and easy one and just put state of the program and then just put a question mark.
Yeah,
seriously. Like,
I'll just go on for 1 second and be like, that's question mark, and then I'm out.
That's the post. Like, drop the mic. Because, like, the way I see it is this: we have two ways that we can influence this, right? Either we find a way to find money, and if we can't find money, then we've got to find a way to influence the system. The one thing that we have right now that's in our advantage is it's not just happening to us. Schools like Ole Miss, you saw what happened to them.
Oh, yeah.
There's already inequity. You see Vanderbilt, as they say, they're doing a lot better this year. When was the last time Vanderbilt had a 10-win season?
Never.
Exactly. Right? So that's my fun fact of the week, right? So money makes the world go round. And even within the other conferences, within the SEC, if you start seeing Vanderbilt continuing to do what they're doing and start winning SEC championships, do you honestly think ESPN or the conference commissioner is going to allow that to happen? No, because Vanderbilt's fan base is this big. The other SEC schools, they've spent a lot of time and equity building up the Alabama brand, the Georgia brand, even UF's brand. So ultimately, I do think that's working for us. What we're missing is that conversation and someone to step out and say, here's the plan. Instead, what we're doing is we're crying poor. Okay.
So why are we poor? I don't get it. Yeah.
Well, so we're poor relative to the top levels in college football. What's the plan to win where we are today? And that's what we're missing. And how do we get there? What's the plan to get there? Right? Danny White always had a vision, always had a plan. He engaged with the fan base. Yes, it's great that you're gosh, what do they call them? The $25,000 donors, the shareholders. The shareholder society membership has gone up year over year. That's great. It is bringing money to UCF, right? But that's great. And we're dealing with a better budget than we have ever. I think our budget this past year was $120 million or $130 million. Now, $130 million budget for our athletics association, compared to the 50 and 60 million that we had at the top of the AAC, right? Yeah, we're making way more money than ever, but it's also costing a lot more money. And Texas is making 230, 250 million a year, right? So that gap is getting wider. Terry, what are we doing about it? That's where we're missing. And we're not making noise. We drove the narrative for the playoff and inclusion. In a lot of ways, you can say that UCF is the reason why the playoff got expanded, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
I'd say so.
So where's that leadership? Where's the chip on the shoulder? I don't give it aggressive, in your face. We don't care if you like us or not. It feels like we're trying to play by the rules. And you can't win when you're playing by the rules, because then you are just boxed in to where everybody else is. And we're not differentiating ourselves. So I think that's a byproduct of that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a leadership failure. And I'm waiting. If Terry does have a grand plan, which I don't think he has, all I keep hearing is he's before the Baylor game telling people, hey, we were surprised by this. Or, hey, we shut down the NIL program. Or, hey, we're poor. We can't afford it. That's not the narrative to lead.
No.
So fix it, or you're going to have a problem, because it's at least that dialogue and communication with your fan base. And the fan base is what got you to the Big 12 to begin with. It's Twitter.
And we're all getting restless. Yeah, we're getting restless that there's no vision, and we're getting restless of, it's not just the win total the last 3 years. It's that, like I said, that I just went on my soapbox right before what you were just talking about, is I don't know when it stops. Like, it's not like, again, I get our defense was good, but I don't feel like we're one or two pieces away. Whatever. I know there's a lot more players on a football team compared to like a basketball.
This season, we were one or two pieces away, primarily quarterback, from having an 8-win season after having a 4-win season.
Maybe. I don't know. I feel, I don't see why we're not a 5 or 6 win team again next year. Like, I don't, what, the whole team is gone again. Like, who's, it's like we talked about, last year Scottfrost came in late, so we didn't have time to recruit and establish relationships. So we had 70 new players. Are we not going to have 70 new players next year? And maybe we get lucky and we hit on way more transfers, and the quarterback that we hit on, or we get a quarterback that we hit on and he's amazing and it changes it. But like, those are all what ifs. Like, I don't see, like, again, like, even like what we're so happy with the defense, right? Those guys are gone. Most of them are. Kelly's gone. Malachi Lawrence is gone. Like, a lot of the key,
the D line, a lot of pieces we lost, but we kept,
like, the linebackers. I mean, Cole Kozlowski, I know he's putting in a waiver to try to come back, but he may be gone. Kelly Lawson, maybe he'll be back, but like, some of the main secondary guys are gone too. They're graduating, right? Dunham. I mean, I don't know. Noah Ruelas on special teams, he's got, like, there's a lot of guys that are graduating, and then there's a lot of guys that have already hit the portal. We're what, two weeks into the portal, and or maybe less, and there's 13 guys in the portal already. You know, there's going to be more. So you add that with graduation. Pretty sure this is going to be probably the same amount of transfers as last year or close to it. It's going to be a brand new team again. So I don't know that if we had Texas Tech, I would say sure.
The difference, and we're going to see more over the next few weeks, right? The latter part of December. But the difference this year, in my opinion, is that we have more time and we at least have a legitimate shot, no matter what our strategy is that we talked about earlier. You know, do you concentrate your money in getting a few big pieces that are going to bring everything else along, or not? Because we do have some money, right? It's just we have less money than everybody else. So do you build those core pieces or not? We could not build around high school this year, even if we wanted to. As I said earlier, there were a lot of people that were asked to leave. and for good reason, especially on offense, right? We weren't bringing them back because it wasn't good enough, right? This year we have more time and we have more access to players that aren't already gone because of that time. So if we have a few key pieces like quarterback that we want to bring in while we give Rocco Marriott time to develop into who he's going to be, then we can go spend on a quarterback and do that for a year or two on a redshirt junior, quarterback that we can bring in that kind of stabilize the offense. We always say quarterback's the most important position on the field at any given time on a football team. Well, put your money where your mouth is and let's test it.
Well, yeah, if we get some stud QB, it can mask a lot of the mistakes. If we can get a defense together, like we did this year, we get a stud QB, we invest some money, and we have a halfway competent O-line. Yeah, I think we can be a lot better. I think, like you said, if you want to pull the one piece away card and say we were a quarterback away from 8 wins, that's probably correct, because a quarterback can make a world of difference. I think as talented
a quarterback doesn't lose to Houston by throwing away a 4 turnover game, and again, nothing against
Davy,
right? Jackson, because he was put in that position, he got us there, to even win that game, right? But they don't throw a pick in the end zone when we could set up for a field goal.
Right.
They just don't. Right. So, and again, we had two different quarterbacks, 3 different quarterbacks, the 3 that anyone could start. And again, we said at the beginning of the season, if you have 3 quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks, right? If nobody's separating themselves. But all of them were hurt throughout the season. None of them got rhythm. None of them got enough offensive snaps. And Cam Fancher was pretty much hurt most of the season. He was with the ones, and he didn't even get all the one. Like Davy, when he was in the game, only got 100 snaps with the ones. 100 snaps the first time he took the football under center. That's nothing for a football team, right? So again, do I think we can get better? Yes. Do I think we can get better players this portal season? Yes. The question is, what's the strategy going to be? And yes, I still do think that even with all of our foibles with regard to the O-line and with regard to everything else we had going on, I think it's just a question of what team do you want to be? Do you want to be a run-heavy team, which would be cheaper, invest in the O-line, be a run-heavy team, have a good defense, which is cheaper than going and get high-level offensive players that we're not going to compete with? We're not going to get Cam Ward here, right? I mean, you saw what happened with Baxter. Kid was injured, started for Texas, had a hometown, wanted to come home, but we couldn't pay anywhere near what he was getting everywhere else because they can afford to throw money around on someone who was injured to see if he works out because he was a starter at Texas as a freshman, right? So where do you go? And then get a couple of receivers so that you can pop a pass. You need a game manager, someone who can hand the ball off, be a somewhat running threat, and be able to pop a pass every once in a while. And have a good defense. That's how you stay consistently 8 to 10 wins. Or do you go for broke and try to build an Indiana with a 2-star quarterback that isn't going to get as much money? That's really and demand as much money. That's really what we're facing right now. So that's what I want to say about that. But at the end of the day, just to kind of end this segment on this note, I put in here for this segment, where's the Riz? Terry says 6'7" on NIL. That's what I feel like, right? It's 6'7" from Terry. That's all I'm getting, right? I don't need 6'7" from you, Terry. I need you to show me, I need you to show me or at least communicate something other than we're poor. Okay, we're poor. Well, what's the way forward? It's not what the problem. Successful organizations don't focus on the problem. They understand the problem and figure out what they can do about it. So what are we going to do about it, Terry? And this is coming from one executive to another. All right. And on that note, so much positivity around here tonight. I wasn't expecting to go down that path, but we did. And I think it's it's a good conversation to have. Now, we are 144 in. So, Alan, what other before we go to the Alan's oxymoronic stat of the week, what we had more stuff in the notes, and we
For
both
football?
well, just in general. What else was there anything else you wanted to mention? I mean, basketball, luckily for us this week, there wasn't any basketball games. The only thing that's really coming up in hoops to talk about, besides women's hoops and Satya Masur getting her 100th win against Mercer this past week, and the fact that the news came out that UCF's admin was looking at firing her last year, so she's really on the hot seat, and that we are not giving her enough money for good assistant coaches. Okay, cool. That's really the only other news from basketball, other than UCF basketball this week will be back in action to play Mercer at 7 p.m. On the 17th, which is Wednesday. And then Saturday, they'll be back in action on the 20th for Florida Gulf Coast University. So that's really the only hoops news until then. We kind of had a week off. So what else did you want to cover before we go to the oxymoronic stat of the week?
No, just quick update on a couple players that declared their return to UCF. You mentioned already Dwayne Thomas, and I know I wasn't on last week's podcast, but Wade and Charles also announced that he was returning, which is it was so ridiculous to see the post. I like Wade and Charles. I think he has a lot of promise. I'm excited he's coming back, but I thought it was so funny that his tweet or his ex post that he was coming back was like unfinished business. It's like, dude, you were a freshman last year. Of course it's unfinished business. You've been in college football for 1 year, I would assume. Yeah. But so we get two key wide receivers coming back. You see every year players now announce that they're coming back, but not every player puts out a formal post. Some guys just come back and there's not some sort of social media post, but we are still waiting on some big names to see if they're coming back. I would say namely is Dylan Wade. That right now is up in the air. We don't know 100% if he's coming back. There's also guys like
there's
Stacey
a lot of
Davis,
noise out there that he's asking for a lot of money.
Correct. So there are guys on both sides of the ball that I think some we're assuming they're coming back. Maybe guys that got injured like a Horace Lockett that we would just assume are coming back. A guy like Tavion Swint that got injured and assume is coming back. But then there's guys like Dylan Wade who are asking for big money and we don't know, but he would be a key building block. So you have that. And then on the NFL side of things, our stud kicker, who was all conference third team, Noah Ruelas, has declared officially for the NFL draft. That great for him. I assume he's going to get some looks, and he'll be the Matt Prater follow up, our next great kicker in the NFL. I know Matty Wright is usually in and out, but I think Noah Ruelas should stick somewhere. Hopefully Philip Dunham also does get drafted. So we'll see if any of our Knights from this year go to the NFL. One other thing I had for football was just RJ Harvey continues to ball out, got his 7th total touchdown this past Sunday, and it ended up being the go-ahead / game winner for the Broncos, who got their 11th win of the season. So good for RJ, going from a 4-win team UCF to likely the top team in the AFC in the Broncos. Probably will get the 1st seed or maybe the 2nd seed. That was all I had for football.
Yeah, and the other thing about RJ, which is, I hate to say this way because it's not Schadenfreude, but the guys in front of him have serious injuries that are going to keep him out for a big part of the season. So he's going to get his chance to pave his own path at Denver. And so far he's meeting and exceeding expectations of what were expected of him at the first year at Denver. And I expect that to continue to happen. So that is great news. Okay. Now that we've gone through that, and because we are about 10 minutes out, let's go ahead and get a Alan's Oxymoronic stat of the week. Alan, take it away. What's our stat for this week?
Yeah, just a small one. So, I wasn't on last week's pod when you probably talked about the 2026 class where we ended up, getting 13 guys and a 14th that will likely sign. So we'll call it 14 players in the class. Interesting, Frost, who really brought, I think, the Florida element back to UCF in 2017, 2016, when he first started here, kind of went away from that formula that not only he did, but Gus Malzahn really furthered. Regardless of how you feel about Gus and how you feel about his recruits, there's no question that he recruited primarily Florida guys. So in 2023, Gus's first class, 11 out of 16 guys were from Florida. In 2024, 11 out of 19 were from Florida. And then last year, which I guess was technically a hybrid of Gus's class that he had signed prior to him leaving, and then a couple of Frost guys that he got last minute, had 8 out of 14. This year, I thought was really surprising. Only 6 out of 14 guys ended up being from Florida, which was odd to see. And it's not like it's, normally the second most prioritized state for UCF is Georgia. You'll see at least a handful, sometimes 4, 5, 6 guys from Georgia. This year we had guys from Missouri, Georgia, Washington, D.C., Texas. There was New York. So very kind of odd map of players. And I don't know if that has to do, if that was strategy. That just has to do with NIL and, who got offers, and maybe it's harder to recruit in Florida because they're better kids and they're expecting a bigger bag. But thought that was interesting. The least amount of Florida kids we've had since really Josh Heupel's last year here. So,
well, I think to answer your question, I think part of it is, Florida kids are, well, first of all, Coach Frost was out of college coaching for a long time, so he wasn't out there maintaining those relationships that he had in Florida, right?
Yeah. Sure.
Number two, I think that most of the Florida kids, by the point that Frost was, coming in, he most of the Florida kids were already going to be spoken for at that point, because it is recruited by everyone, literally, like whether it's Ohio State, LSU, any and every school that you can think of. So I think that's a byproduct of that. This year, though, I honestly don't know what to say to that. I don't know if it's just we can't compete because there are so many schools in here. I know that, and his first stint here, he wasn't out there recruiting for 4 stars, right, or high 3 stars. He was recruiting mid-level 3 stars to come in and play, that stayed for a bit and learned, and he had a system that was taking advantage of the teams. But the teams that he was building, again, the difference between 3 stars, 4 stars, and 5 stars, by and large, is their physical attributes, right? They have success because they are physically gifted to the point where they leave everybody else on the field. It's not typically these people's technique is great, or they can read defenses, so well. The quarterback can read defenses so well, because it's just not that complicated. So it's really physical attributes. And it's more difficult to compete, and you have different levels and different schools that you're competing with for those recruits, now. And I think that's why you saw less in Florida this year more than anything else.
Yeah, that's fair.
All right. Thank you for that. Let's go ahead and do a quick segment. I don't want to leave this out because we appreciate everyone who watches, listens, subscribes, shares, tells their friends, and of course, comments on our videos. So I want to make sure that we still get this segment in. So unfortunately, I'm going to go faster than I normally would, but I want to talk a little listener love because we did have some activity on our videos. Econ Advisor says Marcus, meaning Marcus Jordan, we talked about him last week. Marcus gave his all for 3 years and took his broken body and retired before the last year. He was our best defensive player 1 year, shutting down their best. He was the best three-point shooter on the team another year when we needed that, and drove the lane all season when that was needed. Thank you, Marcus. Those were really good teams. Here, Econ. Look how far we've come. Greg Woody 1001 says, or 1001 says, the season should have ended last week when we were left with only one undefeated team. And he was talking about the playoffs and our thoughts about what happened with the championship and having idle teams. And our response was, if they go to the 16-team playoff, which seems maybe accelerated, I think you may get your wish with the elimination of the championship game. Do you think that should happen? And put that into the comments this week if you watch this, because if we do go to a 16-team playoff and we have these auto bids, whatever that structure ends up being, it really makes the championship game moot, which is crazy because the SEC just instituted a longer conference season. At AG Galaxy 7 says they should take the BCS bowls out of the playoffs, have the playoffs, sure, but have the BCS bowls outside so that teams that don't go to the playoffs will have something to aim at. Bowls are great, and we'll watch. Just adjust the system for all the thousands of people that still put in work all season long. I said, I agree. I don't think that makes a difference right now, given the timing of the portal, etc. Similar situation to teams resting for the playoffs in the NFL. Incentive is just too great, and cons aren't worth it if they're injured to earn what they could earn. And basically what I mean is the timing of the portal just kind of puts us at a disadvantage because people are going to transfer regardless whether they're playing in the Rose Bowl or not. At Doug Whalen 3189 says John Walker tier. Obviously, we feel the same way. But going back to that AG Galaxy quote, unfortunately, it wouldn't matter because the playoffs and the pageantry and the reason people watch the Rose Bowl or the importance of the Rose Bowl, how all that, the Cotton Bowl, the Peach Bowl, all of that came from the fact that they were BCS bowls. Now with the playoff and more importantly, the expanded playoff, I don't think it would matter. And for the bowls, the cities that support them and the advertisers that support them and the sponsors, they couldn't afford to let that happen. The other part about this is, even if you did, all those guys that are in those second tiers that didn't make the playoffs, all those guys that are on those teams, they're going to leave anyway for the portal for a bigger payday. So until they change that, no matter what you do with the playoffs, unfortunately, it really doesn't matter. But what does matter is all of you guys, because we do this for you. So thank you for liking. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for commenting. And make sure to remind people and tell your friends. We appreciate everything that you do. And since we already talked about women's basketball, there's no other UCF sports to talk about right now because everybody's idle except for men's basketball, which plays on Wednesday and on Saturday. So that's going to wrap it up for this Roger and Alan Yells at Clouds and TikTok Terry episode of the Knighted Ones. Thank you again so much. We appreciate you. Go Knights and
charge on.
Charge on. That was very, very, very excited there. Like totally like lots of energy there, Alan.